But there's a tendency to look down on tablature, at least by classical guitarists. They think of it as too simple, crude. So in this video, I like to debunk that idea by showing you that tablature was actually the dominant style of notation for plucked instruments like the lute, guitar, theorbo, and more more than 400 years. So in the next part of this video, I'm going to explain what we can learn about performance practice, the composer's intent, and much more from looking at these historical documents. When we learn to read from historical tablature, which by the way is very easy, I have to emphasize, you can do this, I promise. When you learn to read it and start looking at all of this free digital content available online, like websites like imslp.org, you'll find countless examples, books and books of tablature. And in that tablature, one of the things you'll notice is there's lots and lots of symbols on the page. Symbols like a sharp sign, or a little squiggle, or a comma. This is how Renaissance and Baroque composers notated ornaments. That is to say, things like trills, mordents, appoggiaturos, and much more. Often these composers will tell us what their symbols mean at the beginning of each book. And what you'll see is they ornamented a lot more than we think they did. For example, let's take a peek at this famous piece by John Dowland called the Frog Galliard. There's a symbol or two in each measure that's telling us to do some type of ornament, trill, appoggiatura, or mordent. So if I only played the notes on the page, I would get something like this. And of course that sounds nice, but when you actually understand what the symbols mean, the music is much more elaborate and frilly with all sorts of beautiful decorations on top. The first chord isn't just, but it's with a trill on the top note. People at the time write about the idea that they thought ornamentation added grace and charm to their music. With another one in the second measure, and in the third measure, two in the third measure actually. Another one here, another one, and again another one. The next thing we can learn from historical tablature is, especially in the Baroque period, they used lots and lots of slurs. I'm not holding a Baroque guitar, by the way. You can learn all about this in the video in the description. Slurs are things like hammer-ons and pull-offs. So you pluck one note in the right hand, and then you hit in the left hand hard enough to make a pitch. That's a hammer-on. And if you pluck a note in the right hand, and then you pluck the string with your left hand only, that's called a pull-off. Baroque music is so full of these types of slurs. These long swooping lines tell us to only pluck once and then do the rest in our left hand. So knowing this brings us closer to the performers at the time. It shows us what they wanted musically. Because if they didn't write that slur and they wanted me to play, that sounds very heavy, cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-chum. But what they're telling us by putting this big swooping line over many notes is they want it to be more elegant. They're more legato, connected, and smooth. We can see a great example of slurs being used for a very important musical reason in this menuet or minuet by Håvard E Danielsen. In the B section of this dance, we see the following in slow motion. 3 notes in a slur, a long trill, which is slurred. Trills in the Baroque period are slurred on guitars and lutes, not done cross-string like some modern players do today, which makes a rather, well, let's call it a non-Baroque sound. Then in the third measure of the B section, we actually get 5 notes in a row that are played only with the left hand. This means we have a pluck and then several light, graceful notes, which is very important for dance music. Plucking everything destroys the danceability. It makes it sound clumsy. Whereas the slurs make it sound light. Even the most famous classical guitarists, like Andrei Segovia, have actually famously ignored these historical tablatures in the sense that they didn't know what the markings on the page all meant, or they simply chose to ignore them. And as a byproduct of not understanding or ignoring the historical tablature, you don't get this danceable Baroque piece. Instead, you get something that sounds like this. Now, while I'm not, of course, saying this sounds bad, because Segovia was a great musician and artist, it's clear that if he was to pay more attention to the historical tablature and the notation, he would have arrived at something completely different. Now, in case this is sounding overwhelming, wow, how are we supposed to know what all of these symbols mean? Well, let me help you out. In the same manuscript where you would find that minuet by Bizet, at the very beginning, in French, he describes how to play all the symbols he writes. So he writes, when I write this little comma on this note, I want you to play a trill, a tremblement. When I write this note with a little X, I want you to play mortellement, which is like a mordant. If I write a dot below a note, I want you to play it with the index finger of your right hand. That's one dot. 2 dots is your middle finger. So he's giving us all sorts of information about right and left hand fingerings, ornamentation symbols. It's all there in the manuscripts. Speaking of the dots under notes for the right hand fingering, this is one of the most important things to know about historical tablature in the Renaissance. If you look at almost any Renaissance lute book, of which there are many, you'll see that very often under every other note, there'll be a dot, meaning to pluck with the index finger of the right hand. So when you have long scales, like at the end of Lacrimée or Flow My Tears by John Dowland, the dot under each note means to play with index, and usually you play the other note with the thumb. That means we have this alternation between the thumb and the index, P and I in classical guitar terminology. Thumb, index, index. And because the thumb's a big, heavy digit which goes down with gravity, and the index is a weaker digit which goes up against gravity, we get strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak. In the Renaissance, they called these good and bad notes. This is musicians beyond the grave from 400 years ago telling us what they considered good taste. They thought it was bad taste to play bop, 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 to play everything strong. They thought it was good taste to play strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak. So bad taste would be all the notes the same, and good taste with the fingers prescribed in the manuscript. Regardless of whether or not you'd actually like to play on period instruments, you can play directly from the source, from the manuscript, and you can learn so much about performance practice and the composer's intent from doing so. Not only that, these manuscripts are beautiful to look at, and there's more music out there just from 1400 to 1600 than you can play in a lifetime. I'll put some links in the description to some big books of manuscripts that you can all play through. And even you guitarists who are playing classical, steel string, electric guitar, you can play directly from these manuscripts too. Take your guitar, which of course is tuned E, A, D, G, B, E, and the third string G is going to drop down to F sharp. You can do this by playing the open B string and then the 5th fret on the 3rd string, and then make them sound the same. There. Now with salter tuning, you can play directly from the manuscripts, like a lute. So I really hope this video helped you understand historical tablature and convinced some of you guitarists to start taking a look at it and even learn to play from it. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss other videos I post like this one. If you want to help me make more videos like this, you can go to my Patreon, and there you'll find lots of behind the scenes content about what I'm up to, the videos I'm making, performances I'm giving, and you'll receive rewards like early viewing on all my videos, my CDs, and you can even get a private lesson with me. And lastly, if you're interested in learning the classical guitar, especially at your own pace at home, I have a beginner online classical guitar course called Classical Guitar Pro. It's 6 hours long, 53 videos, so I hope you'll check that out. Until next time, thanks for watching.